Well, when Amy and I first began our first hunt for a home, we came across this little brown house in Merrimack that honestly, it wasn't much to look at. And honestly, it's still not much to look at. I would show you a picture of it, but I don't want you to think that I live in a shed. Well, a few bids were declined on other homes, so we kind of found ourselves circling back. It's a lot worse now than it was then, but it was still bad enough back then. So we found ourselves circling back, and we decided to take a look at this house. And what really sold us on this home was the view, the backyard. It was really something to see. In fact, sometimes today I'll find UPS drivers just kind of staring when they come and deliver packages. So that was really good. We kind of forgot about how the house looked after that. So we put a bid on the house, but I started to have second doubts. I was thinking about the space and all of our stuff and would everything fit in there. The place that we were renting, we had just bought a window air conditioner, so I thought, well, is that going to work there? Because I kind of remember that the house was just loaded with casement windows. If you don't know what a casement window is, it's one of those windows that swing like this, and they don't open up and down, so you can't put regular air conditioners in there. So, I mean, how is our stuff going to fit in there? Is the air conditioner going to work? All these kind of little things. So I was just thinking through all of these steps and all of the challenges that go into buying your first home, and I decided, well, I'm just going to sneak over there and take a second look. And I don't know if that's what you're supposed to do. I guess I didn't sneak. I mean, I was right there. There was nobody living there at the time. Somebody was mowing. He kind of looked at me, and I nodded, and then I kind of walked around the house, and I stuck my face up against the window and tried to look inside. And sure enough, I think there was only one regular window in the house. They were all casement windows. But that's not really what struck me about the whole experience. Kind of a memory that I can still feel in my body from that time. It was something a little bit different than that. Today, our house is full of life. We have, it's full of warm furniture. I'd call it warm furniture, partly broken, mostly broken, maybe. It's full of toys everywhere that they shouldn't be. The fridge has children's drawings and paintings all over the place. There's even this little place on the wall right beside my bed where a creative child decided to take a permanent marker and put an autograph on it. It's messy, it's a little broken, it's not perfect, but it's full of life. I remember looking through that window, pressing my face against, close enough to the glass. And what struck me was how empty it looked. Well, of course it was empty. Nobody was living there. I don't quite mean that. The carpets you could tell were well used. The floor, you could see the paths that many people had treaded. But it was just filled with white walls. Everything was bare. It just kind of felt dead inside. It turns out that there is a big difference. There's a big difference between a house and a home. Well, if you are just joining us for the first time, we're in the last sermon of a series we're calling The Me We Want to Be. It's kind of a fast track through the book of Ezekiel in the Old Testament, which is 48 chapters, so we're doing our best. Last week we learned that God can bring new life to situations in surprising ways. When we dove into Ezekiel chapter 37, a passage where God commands the prophet Ezekiel to speak to dry bones, to tell them to come alive. The week before that, we kind of set the table, and we saw the presence of God departing from the temple step by step by step. And we even saw the hope in that even though God often must change us, he often reveals a plan to bring us back to those places that we long for, those places that we have been removed from. But what if the place that we long to return isn't the place that we need, to be? Maybe you're a parent trying to give your children that same magical experience that you grew up with, whether it's those beautiful Christmas mornings, those perfect vacations, or those Saturday morning pancakes. Maybe you're a parent in that season of life, and you just find that no matter how much effort you put into it, you can't quite create that same experience that you would hope to and that you would long to. Maybe you're retired. Maybe you recently retired, have been retired for some time, and you have stepped or are stepping into a season that you dreamed about for years. But as you think about the things that you're finally able to do, whether that's more travel time, more golfing time, or maybe you'll be able to finally return to that painting practice you picked up a long time ago. Maybe you've finally been able to return to those things, or you're close, but you're only finding that they're not quite as fulfilling as you expected them to be. Maybe you're at a younger season of life and you're working to build that perfect life with a charming home, the dream vacations, those Instagram-worthy moments. I don't have Instagram, but I guess, that's what they're called. And somewhere in the middle, you find that in the middle of checking off these milestones, you're asking yourself, is this it? Is this really what I have been chasing? Well, chances are there's a part of all of us that wants to return to something or to build something new in our lives. Maybe it was a life that was once had, or a future that was always dreamed about, a version of life that feels really full and really rich and meaningful. And this is what's at stake with what we're going to talk about today. What if we get everything that we worked for and we still don't feel like it's enough? What if we spend years recreating these experiences only to find that what made them special in the first place isn't there? And is it possible that we can find ourselves near the fulfillment of our dreams, or at the fulfillment of our dreams, and look in the mirror to find a man or a woman who has only been chasing after the wind? What can we do to chase, well, let me use a metaphor. What can we do to chase the home and not just the bones? Or I'll put it another way. How, when we return to places or build new ones, can we assure that they are everything and more than we'd ever hoped that they would be? Well, chances are that was not a question that was far from the minds of a group of Jewish people who were taken into captivity around the 6th century BC. They were taken from Jerusalem, and they were taken 500 miles away as the crow flies, really further than that as far as travel around the Levant. They were taken. And if you remember from a couple of weeks ago, for those of you who joined us online, we kind of set up the story of Ezekiel and his situation when he first began to prophesy. Ezekiel came from a priestly family, and there was something very important about a priest's 30th birthday, which is where we begin this book. On a priest's 30th birthday, you would enter into the service as a priest. And Ezekiel's father was a priest, his grandfather was a priest, his grandfather was a priest. This was a legacy. But when you're removed from the temple, you have no priesthood. You have no service. So here Ezekiel sits by a canal on his 30th birthday, and God reveals a vision to him. And he takes him in a completely different direction, and he basically brings him into the service of a prophet. Not just any prophet, a prophet who received some amazing, wild, even crazy visions at times, visions that inspired Jesus, visions that inspired authors of the New Testament, like the author of Revelation. There's a lot of similarities. So God took him and did something very different in the middle of his captivity. In the middle of all that, there was good news for Ezekiel. Although God would change them, he would bring them back to the place where these people in Jerusalem, from Jerusalem, used to be. The last 8 chapters of this book unpack what that used to be was going to look like. And to boil it down to one simple idea, it involved the restoration of the city, and especially the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, we're going to spend most of our time together on a key moment in chapter 43. But if the significance of rebuilding a temple doesn't strike you immediately, let's just take a moment and try to unpack that today. Imagine that a group of invaders swept through the Sauhegan Valley and took everybody into captivity and destroyed everything in their wake. You got that picture in your mind? And now, if one day everybody returned, what would be some of the key things in your town, whatever town you hail from today? What would be some of the key things that people would build first? Those emotional things that would invoke a sense of restoration in the community, give people hope that things are coming back together. Just to think of a few examples, if you're from Milford, maybe it would be the town hall and some of the buildings around the Oval, some of these iconic facilities, maybe some of the old mills that are now occupied with other things. Seeing those things come back to life would signal the start of something new, that, hey, we're coming back. Or maybe in Amherst, it would also be the town hall next to the green, or the iconic Congregational Church right next to the green too. Maybe if you're from Amherst, it would be Walmart. All right, no, probably not Walmart. It was like that, but we got to think bigger. Think of the Eiffel Tower to Paris, or think of the Statue of Liberty to New York City. The temple was a part of Jerusalem's very identity. Now, there's a reason why these chapters are so interesting. It may not seem interesting when we just read them casually at first, but what happens in this vision that Ezekiel receives is there's this figure who is described as all bronze. He comes and he comes with all these measuring tools. Not a tape measure, but things, like measuring tools. And he's coming and he's inviting Ezekiel, God's inviting Ezekiel to go with this supernatural figure to measure all the sides of this new building that's being constructed, bigger than it ever was before. Now, what you need to know about this is that it takes a long time. You're reading about a lot of measurements, and it can feel a little dry. You're kind of clogging through these chapters of Ezekiel. But every detail is recorded there. And this has caused some people to speculate and conclude that what Ezekiel is doing, or what God is doing for Ezekiel, is he's providing a blueprint for the Israelites when they someday return. And some people still see that that's a possibility. At the same time, there is another way of reading these measurements, these many, many measurements, and we see this especially at one curious moment in Ezekiel. And we'll get to that in a second, but I just want to take a minute and try to illustrate this together. So I need some kids. Tara, Isaac, Trent, what do you guys think? You want to volunteer? You want to stay there? Okay. Whoever wants to come on up. All right. This was not pre-planned, so it will go how it goes. Okay, so I just need some help measuring today. I got my tape measure, and here you go, Isaac. Why don't we start by, can you guys measure the front row of the seats here and tell me how long it is? All right, Trent, come on over here. Let's see. Can you tell me what number you see there? We'll go with that one. What do you think? What do you see? Is that 14? No. I think we're 14 feet about. Yeah, okay, good. All right, let's try another one. Why don't you come on over here? Let's measure how high this is. We do how high my table is here. Okay, Tara, what do you see?
Around, 44 inches.
44 inches, all right. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to measure the perfect. Measure the perfect.
What's that?
Oh, the perfect? You've heard that word, perfect, right? Like perfect, it's perfect. Like when your mom sees you after you've drawn something and she says, it's perfect, right? So can you measure the perfect, please?
7 letters long.
Okay. Well, anyone else want to try to measure the perfect? Any other takers? None, huh? Well, hey, good try. Why don't you put the tape measure? Let's give them a round of applause for almost perfect, right? Almost perfect. That's kind of a hard thing to do. What does that even mean? But that's kind of what God says to Ezekiel here in chapter 43. Son of man, this is kind of a concluding measurement. Describe the temple to the people of Israel that they may be ashamed of their sins. Let them consider its perfection. Notice that word consider, and if you want to pop over to the next slide, we need to observe something about that. That word consider, every other time it's used in the book of Ezekiel, is the same word used for measure. When the bronze figure is measuring the dimensions of the temple, it's the same word there. So maybe what's really going on is to measure the perfection. That may not be all that helpful, but perhaps, especially since we're in a vision and fantastical things can happen in visions, sometimes confusing things, maybe one of the best ways to make sense of this is Ezekiel, or God is saying to Ezekiel in this vision to measure how perfect the temple is. And perfect is a little bit of an anachronistic word because when we think of perfect, we think of like something to a T. We think of exactness. We think of down to the, half, eighth of an inch. But often in the ancient world, when they thought of perfect, they thought of order or wholeness or completeness. And so God is saying to Ezekiel, as he tells the rest of the people in Jerusalem, let them see how whole and complete and how good this is. And you saw the word shame. Unfortunately, it's because they missed out on this. They missed out on it. Let them measure the perfection and ordering of life and reality as it was meant to be. So how are you ordering your life? If we piggyback off of that, how are you ordering your life right now? What's the measure of perfection or completeness in your life? For me, and I've said this before, it's often just checking things off my list. It's, did I get enough done today? And I most of the time don't feel like I get enough done today. But what about for you? Is it success? Is it what's in your bank account? Is it your grades? Is it your dream house? Is it your parenting, whether your kids behave or whether they get into the right school? Maybe you measure it by the amount you get done every day like me. Could God be pointing to something different here? A different kind of measurement for these exiles to measure themselves by. It could, in fact, what we're about to read, I think, is going to be the capstone of this temple restoration moment. And it turns out that it has nothing to do with stones and pillars. Let's read this together. Well, I'll read this. You don't have to read it with me. Then he led me to the gate facing east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel was coming from the east. And the sound of his coming was like the sound of many waters, and the earth shone with his glory. And the vision I saw was just like the vision that I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and just like the vision that I had seen by the Chebar Canal. And I fell on my face as the glory of the Lord entered the temple by the gate facing east. The Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the temple. You know what makes a temple not much more than a paperweight? It's when God's presence is not there. This is the crowning moment, the capstone of this temple restoration. After God has slowly abandoned the temple in Ezekiel 11, there's a promise here in Ezekiel 43 that his presence is coming back. It's filling the temple. It's occupying its space. And all of a sudden, it's less like a house and more like a home. Think about the places in your life that have the deepest significance to you. Maybe for some of you, it's a childhood home. Or it's a place where you vacation, where you go back to frequently. Maybe for some of you, it's a playground where you took your kids or your grandkids, or where you were taken as a kid by your parents or by your grandparents. It's not about the walls. It's not about the playground equipment. For the most part, it's not about the relaxing time and the amazing views. It's the ones who fill it, isn't it? Well, throughout history, people have wrestled with what it means to experience God's presence. What does it mean to experience God's presence? Well, some really experience God's presence through meditation, reading God's word and reflecting upon what it means for one's life. Others have experienced God's presence through silence, a stillness that allows God sometimes to subtly prompt a person in their inner spirit, to prompt a person's soul in invisible but not unfelt ways. Still others experience the presence of God in nature. When they go out and they see this incredible design and they're drawn to the architect beyond it. And one of the most important ways that we experience God's presence in New Testament times is by coming together as a community of like-minded believers, because God calls that community, not the building, but the community, his temple, where his presence dwells in a special way. God's presence can be, though mysterious and experienced differently, it can be healing. His presence can be faith-affirming, and it can give us a sense of purpose in life. As I've studied this and as I've considered it and gone on my own personal journey, one of the expressions that I have found most helpful is these terms: tempered mysticism. Tempered mysticism. And what that means is it's a sense of connecting in a kind of a supernatural way, but also held back from maybe the extremes. And this is why it's helpful for me. It helps me because it kind of grounds my expectations toward God. It helps me not to have expectations towards God that maybe in any given moment he doesn't have. It also helps me when I don't experience God's presence to still be faithful. At the same time, it helps me also to be open to the ways that God might be moving in my life and pointing me to certain things and doing different things in my life. All of that is really helpful. And God's presence is especially relevant to us today, living today. After Jesus died and rose again, the Spirit was released in a new way where the Spirit of God indwells us individually as temples, and it dwells within our presence as a community. So the experience of God's presence can be felt in new and powerful ways. At the same time, as important as God's presence is here, with a little bit of a twist in this vision, we find that it's not just the experience of God's presence that's important, but the kind of presence that these people are to experience. Let's look at this together. While the man was standing beside me, he's speaking about the bronze figure, I heard one speaking to me out of the temple. And he said to me, "Son of man," that's God's way of talking to Ezekiel, "this is the place of my throne and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever." God is not just making a home. He is going to a throne. Well, I had a really great opportunity a few weeks ago to sit down with my friend Wookie, who is going to come up and has agreed to share a little bit about his experience. Wookie grew up a Christian, I guess you could say, for the most part, but well, there was a time for you where it felt like your Christian experience was, you used the word miserable. I like that. And then you made some changes, and things were better. It was still kind of the same. Why don't you welcome Wookie first, and let's hear from him.
So I guess I'll start out in my mid-20s. I found myself with a really good life. I had kind of done everything that was expected of me by my family and my church and my upbringing, where I had gone to finished high school, gone to the Christian college my parents wanted me to go to, studied what they thought I should study, met the girl, married the girl young, bought a house that had been remodeled, and had a great son and a great daughter, but was pretty miserable with just life in general. I was working a cubicle job in the field I was supposed to be in, doing the right job, moving up the ladder, but a lot of early calls, a lot of late calls, really just not a lot of fulfillment. And I had this desire in me to start a freelance business and go out on my own. And so I'd like to say I just decided, worked up the gumption to go do it. But really, Felicia, my wife, told me, you really need to go do this because you're going to drive me crazy. You're miserable. You're miserable to be around. And so we did. We kind of went all in. I started a freelance career in my garage, just cold, concrete floors, and things were tight. Got down to $35 in our bank account that first year. We left the church we'd been a part of for a long time. We bought a fixer-upper house. Got pregnant with another kid. So we just bit off a lot. And it was awesome. It was great in that we were finally living that adventure. And through that, I ended up getting a dream gig. I've always very much been into motorcycles. That's kind of a passion of mine. And I got a gig to lay out a beautiful motorcycle magazine. Work started coming in. I got a chance to be a part of a coffee shop, which was something else I enjoyed, being a part of the community. And there was still that same like nagging, that same, I don't know if miserable's the word, I probably did use that, John, but there was like a level of misery to it where it's like, you know, it was kind of the same thing. Like the motorcycle world was the same thing as everything else in that it was a lot of performance, a lot of like posing, like everybody's trying to act cooler than the other company or the other guy or whatever. And it got to the point where I decided I had to let the motorcycle magazine go. And yeah, so is that where you want to take it from there? Or?
Where do you want to take it?
Yeah, I could take it from there. So yeah, so I decided, all right, I gotta tell these guys like it's just not working out. So I don't remember exactly when it was, but they were a good chunk of my freelance income at that time. So it was maybe, let's just say they're about 30% of the income. And so I met with them and said, guys, like it's just not working out. Like I'll finish this next issue, and then we'll just have to part ways. And I got an email at that time from someone I didn't know through my website, and they said, hey, we saw your name in the masthead of the magazine. We'd love to do like a one-off print issue. Me and my brother have a blog we've been doing for years. Would you be interested? And I kind of like, you know, like snooped on their URL to see who they were, and it was I saw they had like a Christian, like underlying Christian message. It was like a blog for young guys, and I was, at that point, was like pretty turned off to it, because I had kind of been through the church thing, tried to meet the expectations of the church and the people in my life, and that was not panning out. And but I wasn't in a position to say no, so I said, yeah, I'll do it, but I'm not going to tell them anything about my Christian background. And so I did the first a print issue of their blog, took some of their best articles, and did a one-off print issue for them, and it went well. What's the question? How far you want it?
Oh, well, so, yeah. Well, you know what? Something that you said is that you met with these guys and you found some kind of religious stuff that you, maybe baggage. As you got to know them, as you got to experience their ministry, that you're like, the term that you used, like, you had to break some religious ideas, is the term that you used. Tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, so did that one-off issue. It went well. The guy said, hey, we'd love to fly you out and talk about doing this twice a year. Would you be interested in meeting us? So flew out to Colorado, met with the guys, and kind of got a feel for who they were, and told them a little bit of my backstory. And they said, they just kind of left it at that, like, oh, cool, yeah, it's good. Like, we get it. We're happy to keep working with you. And did another issue, flew back out to plan the next year. He's like, guys, I just don't understand the way you, like this business model, how this works. Like, I'm trying to understand, like, we don't do advertising. You don't want to do social media because you feel like social media kind of like rots the soul of these young guys. Like, what are we trying to do here? Like, I don't understand how we build this business. And one of the guys that was in there was like, dude, I get it. It's confusing. He's like, what might be helpful for you to know would be like, we have like a parent organization, and we host these events for men. We'd love to have you come back out in a month. Would you be interested in coming out for a month? You can keep working for us over the years and kind of piece it together, or you can come out and like experience it for yourself and see what it's all about. So a month later, I find myself out in Colorado. I'm thinking like, we're gonna go to this event, there'll be 40, 50 guys. In reality, there's 450 guys. It's a beautiful lodge in the mountains in Colorado, and I'm so turned off. Like, this is like, I didn't want to be with 500 like Christian guys in the mountains. I want to be in the mountains, but not with 500 Christian guys. and but I'm like, whatever, like, I'm here, I'm gonna come like open-handed. They also pay me a fair amount of money right now to do this, so let's go. So I get in, and the first session was kind of like, it's, John was saying, it's,
Not me, another
not you,
John.
it's the other John, the guy that was speaking, and he's like, it's helpful to know like where you're at. Like, you guys are born into a world at war, and you're born in Act 3 of a three-part play. So it's helpful to know where you're in, like where you land in this. And so this is like, oh, I just never really heard of this before. I've been in church my whole life. I'd never heard of it. And throughout the weekend, he just kind of brought up a few things, like saying like, hey, those desires that you have deep in your heart to go pursue an adventure or go start a church or go start a business, those are good. God gave those to you. That's a very natural thing. And that's there's access there, and God has something for you there. And I had always been under the impression that these are things I needed to rein in. There was a formula for being a good Christian. And that permission to pursue some of these things that were deep in my heart kind of unlocked something for me. And over the course of that weekend, one of the sessions, John, the speaker, not Nuxel, but he said, a lot of you have been taught your heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it, right? Because that's in Jeremiah. And I was like, yeah, I've always known. I've been afraid of the things in my heart, the things I desire. He's like, that's true, but Jesus has come in and changed your heart if you've given that to him. Your heart is good and can be trusted. And he said, I want you guys to go back to your bunks or go out on a walk in the mountains and just ask God, what does he have? What does he have to say for you? He might have a name for you. And part of the beautiful part for me was I didn't believe God could talk to me. So that was interesting. I went back to my bunk actually, and I said, God, do you have anything you want to say to me? Anything about myself? And God did. He said, no, I see you as trustworthy and someone that's dependable. And that was something immediately for me that hit, because in my story of my life, I had been living the last 10 years under the impression that I wasn't dependable. I was going to eventually let my wife and my kids down. And the thought that my father, my dad, who's naming me, said, that's not your story. That's not what I have for you. I see you as dependable and reliable. Just opened something up in me, and give me something else I could live into. So that was a pretty wild weekend. Yeah.
One of the things that you said to me when we spent some time together that I had to kind of meditate on myself was a challenge that the other John gave to you about your empire. What was that all about?
Sure. So I'm trying to make it fairly brief for you, but this is a process over the years. So the next year I found myself out in Colorado again, and at this point I'm in my mid-30s, and I had fallen pretty hard for the hustle and grind culture, and I wanted to make something. I wanted to start businesses. Any business opportunity came in, I wanted to do it. My tendency is more to be a workaholic, and I was challenged by a friend. He said, guys, what would it look like to you're in your 30s, the whole world is go build your empire right now, build something, build a name for yourself. What would it take, or what would it look like to take 10 years, take a decade, when instead of building, learn what it takes to be the kind of man that God can entrust his kingdom to. And just the thought of that was so impactful to me that I said, all right, I'll do it. I'll take, and it's just really been a shift in my mindset. Instead of what can I do to build something for me, as more into what in me needs to be built and excavated and explored and changed to align with God and with his heart.
Give him a round of applause. Isn't that really good? as I said, when we sat down together, I was just really stirred by that expression. Instead of building your empire. And maybe some of you are kind of feeling the same thing that I was at first, like, well, I'm not really in the empire building business, but I got to thinking about that for a little while, and maybe some of you are thinking that, hey, I'm just here to support my family and to follow some harmless passions and dreams, and that's kind of what I was thinking about initially too. Something to kind of supplement this experience for me is, as I've shared with you previously, I've been reading through the Chronicles of Narnia with my kids, and I hate to dip in so often, but there was one experience I had in the 5th book called The Horse and His Boy that just really stopped me when I read this. And if you haven't read The Horse and His Boy, it's about a talking horse from Narnia who has been captured into slavery, and he meets this slave boy, and they plan for their escape. So they go out into the wilderness together, and everything, this horse's name is Bree, and everything that you find out about Bree is he's courageous, he's strong, he's intelligent, he's smart, and you're just following them along on this adventure until one point in the adventure, Bree gets scared and keeps running while the boy jumps off and turns around to save some of their companions. And Bree, after that, lives in disgrace. And this is what he says when somebody tries to cheer him up. It's all very well for you. He says, it's all very well for you. You haven't disgraced yourself. But I've lost everything. And then a wise man responds to him saying, my good horse, you've lost nothing but your self-conceit. No, cousin, don't put your ears back and shake your mane at me. If you are really so humbled as you sounded a minute ago, you must learn to listen to sense. You're not quite the great horse you had come to think from living among the poor dumb horses, non-speaking horses. Of course, you were braver and cleverer than them. You could hardly help being that. It doesn't follow that you'll be anyone very special in Narnia. But as long as you know you're nobody very special, you'll be a very decent sort of horse on the whole. That hit me right in the heart. And you probably have to read the whole book to experience that. But it hit me right in the heart because I wasn't reading the book the right way. I wasn't reading the character the right way. His pride had been hidden from me all along. I just got sucked into his character. But isn't that how pride is? Isn't that how pride is? It wraps itself in projects that we do in comparison with other people, in building things and building things and building things. And now all of those things that we do, they can be very good things. But you can be a parent, you can be an aspiring business person, even a retiree, and all the time hide from yourself that what you are really doing is primarily about you, or in my case, about me. Now that can be true of pastors too. Excellence is a good thing, but excellence can be a disguise for building empires. Empires, after all, do take different forms. And I've had to tell myself recently that as long as I'm wholeheartedly pursuing God, being an average horse in Narnia is completely okay. Friends, letting God take the throne in our lives, it doesn't mean that we abandon dreams. Sometimes it does. But when we do, he always redeems those things. And when we learn from him, when we lean into him, we get to be free from the baggage that we didn't really know that we had. But there are also those cases where he takes those dreams and he brings them back, purified, full of meaning, even clean. If nothing else, when you think about When you think about the spaces that you are creating, the ambitions that you are chasing after, or the lives that you are building, make space. Make space as you transform those houses into homes. Make space for the King. God lives where the throne is. So as we close today, I'd like to just leave you with the same question. What empire are you building? And how have you wrapped it in your personal identity? And you know what? One of the best ways to identify those empires in our life, it's to just take a step back and imagine what your life, ideally, will be like in 5 years. Picture it from a moment. And then imagine what it would feel like to lose that, to see it all go away. Chances are that might reveal an empire in your life. Now, that doesn't mean that those ambitions and those desires and that drive are bad things, to be very clear. But imagine getting there after all of that hard work and those years of commitment and feeling, you know what, this is not all it's cracked up to be. Today, I'm not going to give an altar call to come and lay your dreams down up here. That's not really the goal. Instead, I just want you to imagine what it would be like to invite God into your hopes, into your ambitions, into your dreams. And not just to invite him in, but to invite him to be king of those ambitions, hopes, and dreams. Could it be that the most meaningful, beautiful, even if terrifying result is something that we haven't even thought of yet? And could it be that our present, these journeys that we have with God right now, could be more meaningful as we embrace him to be king? Friends, God is bringing us back to something old, and he is bringing us back to something new. He is setting things the way that they're supposed to be, and that impacts us. And the choices that we make, it impacts us individually. But the best that we have is still something to look forward to. We have something good and beautiful and true to look forward to when we put God on the throne. Let's pray.